When someone is looking to buy or build a new game PC, you might hear them talking about future-proofing their PC. What does that exactly does that mean? Is that doable? And is that even a wise decision? Let's find out in this next video. Hey there, this is Ethic PC Guy, and in this video I'll be talking about future-proofing. Now, what exactly is future-proofing? Usually when people talk about that, they talk it in the sense of upgrading or buying a new computer and getting better, higher-end parts with the thought that that will make their computer last longer before they feel the need to upgrade again to get increased performance. But is that even a good idea? These days, I would say not so much, for several reasons. Now, the first reason is for you to buy high-end stuff right now, it's actually quite expensive because we are at the end of one cycle and start of another in terms of computer components. Like let's say, for example, graphics cards. They are coming out now with new technologies like ray tracing, AI, that sort of thing. Um, PSUs, for example, are also at the point where the current high-end sockets are going to most likely be retired soon, and the next generation will be coming with different sockets. So it's not great to future-proof right now, price-wise and actual technology-wise. But in general, is it even worth future-proofing? Also not really. This is because usually when you buy high-end parts, you pay a premium. And if you would want to analyze your performance gain per money spent, you at the middle range is where you pay the least for, let's call it, the amount of performance improvement that you will see. If you want to go to the higher end, you will pay a premium, and yes, the performance will be a lot better, but the amount of money you pay in comparison to how much an improvement you'll see, it will be more expensive, let's say, money per performance. So what does that mean in terms of future proofing? It means that if you buy a high-end part now, let's say that you spend $1,000, euros, whatever on it, it might last you 3 years, 4 years. I don't know what your standards are for when you need to upgrade again. Let's say it lasts you 3 years, when you could buy a middle range part for 500, and then you can buy another middle range part in 2 years instead of three, and it will cost you another 500, so you still spend the same 1,000. But the one that you will buy next in 2 years to replace the one you would be buying now, you still spend 1,000, but the second one that you'll buy will probably be having similar or perhaps even better performance than the high end that you buy today, also for 1,000. So in the end, you spend the same and you get less performance in the long run, and you are also playing with, in case of malfunctions, which hopefully don't happen. But if you buy one part now, high end, you'll have, let's say, 2 years warranty. After those 2 years, if something happens, you're on your own basically. If you buy a middle range now, you will have warranty for 2 years or a year, or depending on the manufacturer, whatever. You'll have the warranty now, and then when you replace it again in a year or two, you'll have warranty again. So you're covered for a longer period of time. Now, with all of this said, I'm not advising anyone to not buy high-end parts and just buy middle tier stuff. That's not what I'm saying at all. If you want the best of the best, if you want as powerful upgrades, and if you have the money to spend, it's always a good idea. I'm always in favor of getting better performance and better quality stuff. I do it myself, to be honest. It's just if you want to keep budget in mind and have reasonable performance, even if not the highest end of parts, then future proofing in this manner is not really effective. Now, another reason why it's not really a good idea right now is because, like I said, we're at the start of a new cycle of parts and components and at the end of another. In the graphics card field, we are seeing ray tracing and AI learning improving the quality our graphics cards performance, mostly in games, but also in other applications that rely on the graphics cards. So there's that. That also means that when a new technology comes out, usually the first generation or two have to pay a higher price than in the future down the line because it's new technology, and usually early adopters pay a premium for such new stuff, often without seeing a lot of benefits. Because let's take ray tracing as an example. It's a new technology, it's great, it looks amazing, but there are not many games that support it yet, for example. So you are paying a premium for something you cannot really use a lot. As opposed to if you were to buy right now a card without ray tracing, it will have great performance in current games that don't even have ray tracing yet, and you can buy an actual ray tracing card in 2 years if it actually gets adopted as a standard for a lot cheaper, most likely, because it's more commonplace technology at that point. And there will be a lot more games that adopt it, so you'll actually have an actual performance increase by that, as opposed to now where it's just sitting there not being used. In the CPU field, on the Intel side of things, this is most likely going to be um, the last generation. The next generation is probably the last with the 1151 socket, and the next motherboards and next CPUs will use a different socket, most likely. What does that mean? If you buy a new one now, a new motherboard and CPU, and if you want to upgrade again soon, you will need a different motherboard to go with your CPU or a different CPU to go with your motherboard. So there is that, as opposed to if you wait, if you, for example, buy something to get by, just to get by now, and if you buy the next family with the new socket whenever it comes out, probably in a year or more, but anyway, if you buy that one then, that socket will probably be continued for a few years after that. So if you want to upgrade your CPU again, and that socket is still current, then you don't have to buy a motherboard anymore. So there is also that part of future proofing that revolves around planning your upgrades around the lifetime cycles of the parts. When are they relevant? When are they going to be retired? And trying to make the most of it so that you can actually use it for longer and build on it for longer. Especially in the case of motherboards and sockets, because motherboards usually stay good for a long time and don't have a massive improvement and impact in performance unless you're like an overclocker or something of the sort. In terms of RAM, there's also going to be DDR5 RAM coming out, not soon, I might add, but in the next, let's say, 2 to 6 years, you probably will start seeing DDR5 usable on your average computer. It might take a long time, but you will probably need new motherboards for that as well. So again, if you were to buy a new motherboard now, high-end, you would pay a lot for it, and you would have to replace it anyway if you are planning to upgrade stuff again in the next 2 to 6 years, which you probably will. So there is also that. Another reason not to take future proofing literally, especially right now, it's especially bad time for that sort of thing. Now, what can you usually safely future proof with? Hard drive storage is a pretty established technology that has not seen massive leaps in the past several years. You have your standard disks with 7.2 or 10,000 RPM. It's not really getting a lot better than that anyway. So if you want a big disk to accommodate for programs and games getting larger and larger over the years, as they have been ballooning a lot in terms of size, um, hard drives are a safe place to be like, you know what, I'm gonna get a hard drive, an enormous 4 terabyte one or 5 or 10 or whatever, that will last me for I don't know how long. That's pretty safe as well. SSDs at this moment as well, they have been dropping in price, they are pretty affordable, so I would also recommend getting a good SSD if you're looking for more quick storage space. Other than that, there aren't really many components that you can future-proof. PSUs are a pretty standard component. You don't see a lot of change and improvement either. You can buy a good PSU and be done with it for a very, very long time, and it will probably last you years and years. Fans are a different story. Fans, there are a lot of good fans, but they have mechanical wear over time. So it's difficult to say a fan will last me this amount of time because it all depends how much you use it. Because the longer you have them spinning, the faster they're going to wear out, and you never know when they're going to kick the bucket, so to speak. On the other hand, fans are pretty cheap, so it's not really something you can future-proof with. I mentioned the Intel side of things, but also on the AMD side of things, um, there will be a new family of CPUs coming shortly in a few months. Uh, they will be using the same socket, and it has already been confirmed by AMD that that socket will be still used for at least another generation. So that is an example of what you can future-proof a little bit. Uh, because if you were to buy a motherboard for such a CPU, which is different from one for Intel, I might add, it would be enough for at least another generation. Same story with the graphics cards from Team Red. There will be a new family coming out. Who knows how good or bad it will be? So it will probably not compete with the very high-end Nvidia ones, but it's worth keeping an eye out. So it's another facet of future proofing that you never really know what improvements and what will be coming out. So it's not great to plan a lot down the line. That brings me to the next point that you never know what new technology is going to become the standard or not. And if you're one of the first adopters of a new technology, like again, ray tracing, you are basically gambling that that technology will become widespread. Let's say that ray tracing kicks off and it actually takes off, and a lot of stuff starts supporting it, and that you have 2080 Ti. And let's see, next, the first generation usually it's usable but not amazing. We have seen gameplay footage of ray tracing games, and they are barely breaking the 60 FPS most of the time. While as in if you were to buy one the next generation, you probably have a lot of improvement in ray tracing compared to now, and possibly pay less as well. No, there's the so yeah, if you were to buy the highest expensivest, most expensive one now, you're paying a premium for what in 2 years will be subpar performance, and you will get better for cheaper, most likely in a year or two. There's also the other side of the coin, which is if it does not become popular, you bought one now and you pay that enormous premium for it, and it will never really be used, and you just basically wasted your money. Again, if you're not on a budget and if you don't care about the money too much, and if you just want the best of the best, ignore this altogether. But if you are looking for price per performance, it is kind of important to keep these things in mind. So there's also that. You always run a risk when you adopt new technology. If you wait a generation or so, you have a better idea if it's a good investment or not. With all of this said, if you want a high-end computer with all the best parts, um, future proofing is not something you even think about usually. If you want a budget conscious computer, which is mostly what I am aiming this towards at this point, then I would suggest going for the, let's say, mid to mid high end of the parts. Like for example, don't grab a 9900K, grab an 8700K instead. Don't grab a 2080 Ti, grab a 2070 or a 1080. And in a couple of years, you'll have a better idea what is the standard, what is not the standard. And in the meantime, those parts are still amazing. They're still great parts for the average user. Uh, an overclocker or a performance freak might want the best of the best and might be like, no, that's unacceptable for my standards. But for the vast majority of the people, that's not the case, and those parts are still amazing, and they are a lot cheaper, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the things that I mentioned right now. So that is my advice as it comes to future proofing. It's mostly not worth chasing. It's always worth keeping a bit in mind. You should never get something that is just enough for your needs now, you should always plan a little bit ahead. Like, getting a 120 gigabyte SSD today, it would just be completely stupid, considering you pay next to nothing. I mean, you don't even find them very often now, but considering you pay, let's say, 35 euros for a 120, and you can go up and pay 50 or 60 for a 250 or 500 even gigabyte SSD, it would just be stupid to go for the 120 unless you're really, really on a tight budget. Because you can expect Windows to get more updates and more size in the future, and then you're going to be full. Then you have to buy a new one again. And that way you just spend more money than you actually need to, and you would have saved more if you'd actually spend just a little bit more to begin with. Same goes for CPUs and graphics cards. You're not gonna buy a CPU with 2 or 4 cores right now. That it's cheaper, yes, but stuff is using more and more cores and hyper-threading better. So it would be a very bad purchase to buy something like that, even though it would be cheaper. So it's better to spend a bit more to get a bit better. But that also doesn't mean to get the most expensive 500 euro processor either. GPUs, same story. So yeah, it's worth future-proofing to a degree, but not going all out and expecting it to last 6 to 7 years with amazing performance, because it will just decrease over time. That is my advice to people chasing the future-proof concept. Not worth it most of the time, worth to a small extent. Only to a small extent. Don't go out of the way to future-proof unless you are prepared to get expensive stuff without counting on it being future-proof to begin with. That is my advice to you. This is Ethic PC Guy. I'll see you next video and have fun.